This morning I did get the feed ordered. I was talking about buying feed yesterday, and they were closed for New Year's, but today I did get it ordered this morning. Right when they opened, I called them. And if y'all take a look in that last bunk over there, you're gonna see that there's hay in there, and that hay is feed left over from last night. So I know that these animals, as of right now, they are completely eating their fill. I don't have to worry about it. They are if they have food left over, that means they're not hungry, right? I mean, let's just use some common sense, right? And so I got the feed ordered this morning. I got the numbers on it, and I went and I was reading some I was looking into some papers. The lady that I was speaking to at the feed mill, you know, I use these measurements like a TDN, and I use TDN. You know, I try and keep the animals, if you start them off on 65 and then slowly move them up towards 70, 75, and if they start having acidosis, then you don't go any higher. And I keep them at about 12 to 14% protein, etc., etc. But this morning, and I've been watching presentations, and I've been learning about what I could about animal feed. I've been learning about what I can about animal feed, and a few of these presentations that I watched, they were talking about NEG and NEM. And when I spoke to this lady this morning, she was actually speaking about NEG. And so I was like, oh, well, you know, maybe this is my opportunity, because I've been wondering. I was like, what is NEG and what is NEM? I've been watching presentations, and you know, they have TDN on one portion. They have like a bar graph, right? They have like a chart, and then they'll write the different things that they're measuring, like TDN, protein, percent of their body weight in feed, NEG, NEM. They'll write all these things, and then they'll list the numbers underneath it. And I remember, because me, you know, and I was watching this thing with the idea of I'm going to collect the TDN information. But as I was watching this, I remember I was like, I wonder what this NEG thing is. Like, what is NEG? What is NEM? And then I just completely forgot about it, because the presentation also had TDN in it. And so as long as it had the TDN values, I was like, yeah, I'm good to go. But this morning I was speaking to the lady at the feed mill, and she was talking about NEG. And so I was like, this is my opportunity. This is like, you know, I'm sitting here drinking coffee, ordering feed. I'm just gonna open a new tab on my browser, and I'm just gonna look up what NEG is. I'm just gonna look it up to see what it is, because I've been wondering, what is this NEG thing, right? What is NEG? What is NEM? And so NEG and NEM is just a more accurate representation of TDN. So it's like, if you really want to get into the nitty gritty and understand what TDN is, you're talking about NEG and NEM. And NEM is the net energy required for maintenance. And usually when an animal's putting on about 1 pound a day, it is requiring its net energy for maintenance. And NEG is the net energy required for gain. So first, if you are feeding your animals, they will first achieve their NEG or the NEM. They will first achieve their net energy required for maintenance, and after they have eaten enough energy to get enough for their maintenance, then they will start putting on the NEG, which is the net energy required for gain. And so I was like, that's very interesting, because now it's like, you know, now I have a bigger understanding of what TDN is, right? TDN is kind of like this rough outline number, right? I always say that the big idea of TDN is I like to start them off at 65. I take them to 70, 75, something like that. If they start showing signs of acidosis, then I reduce the energy concentration, and I look to keep their protein, you know. And I've been talking about measuring every unit of feed as an individual measurement, right? Protein, I don't think about feeding them 12 to 14% protein. I say, if I give them if I give them 2 pounds of distiller grains each, and distiller grains is 30% protein, then they're getting 60 units of protein. And I'm giving them 1 pound of corn a day each, and if I'm giving them 1 pound of corn a day each, then they're also getting another 8 to 9 units of protein, right? Per corn feeding as well. And so I calculate how much protein are they getting in total. And then in terms of a individual measurement, and then I also keep an eye on them to see if they're having diarrhea, are they having acidosis, etc., etc. And the smaller your animal is, the more concerned you need to be about what they are eating. All right, I talk about this all the time. If your animals are smaller, you cannot give them acidosis. If you give a 250-pound animal acidosis and the animal's freaking out, the animal's gonna die, gonna develop BRD. The BRD is gonna be contagious. You're gonna lose 7, 8, 9, 10 animals, and then you're right, and then bankruptcy. All right, and so you gotta really pay attention to the details. All right, you gotta pay attention to the details. You gotta get it together. All right, and I'm giving you the best information that I can. In terms of the cattle business, I legitimately make so much money running cattle that I can do whatever the heck I want. And so, I'm giving you the best information that I can. All right, and so this is the information that I collected, and I was actually reading a paper this morning. And this paper, they were using a 64. I actually got it written down right here if you want to take a look at what I'm looking at. They were using a 64 NEG feed they were using a 64 NEG feed. And this feed was 20% corn silage, 73% corn, 2% alfalfa, and 5% soybean meal. And they were feeding a 700-pound steer 16 pounds of this feed a day. And they were getting 3.62 pounds of gain a day. And so the thing that I found interesting about this paper is that they are only feeding about 2.3% of the animal's body weight a day. And they are getting 3.62 pounds of gain. And I was like, I don't, that's like a feed yard situation. And me, I don't really want to be in a situation where I am, okay, because here's the thing. It's like stuff like this. It's like if you don't have like precise equipment, if you are not like measuring exactly how much energy and protein and etc., if you are not measuring this stuff like on a daily basis, like if you do not have like precision equipment, I would not do something like this. Because if you are putting on 3.62 pounds a day on an animal by feeding that animal 2.3% of their body weight, if you accidentally overfeed an animal, that animal will develop acidosis very quickly. All right, if you accidentally overfeed an animal, that animal will develop acidosis very quickly. All right, and so unless you are like very, very, very meticulous, you are actually like sitting there and measuring, like you have to be spot on with this stuff if you are going to do something like this. And to put things in, and I'll tell you the feed that I'm going to use and the results that I anticipate. I'm not going to use a 0.64 NEG feed. I'm going to use something about a 0.49. It's going to be about a 30% less NEG. Why am I going to do that? Because it's going to have more roughage. Or how am I going to do that? The feed that I'm going to utilize has more roughage material in it. This feed has been specially formulated by the feed mill, etc., and it has more roughage material in it. And the 0.49 NEG, and my big idea is that I like to feed my animals. I find that if I give my animals feed, when I give my animals feed, if I'm just going to let them eat however much they want, like I did yesterday, right? Like I do, I give them the corn, I give them the distiller grains, I give them the hay, I give them the grass, and I let them eat however much they want to eat. I just let them eat as much as they want. I let them, and then you can take a look at my animals, right? None of my animals are emaciated. None of my animals are skinny. All of my animals are at either a body conditioning score of 5 or 6, right? I mean, we're talking about an average weight of maybe about 500 pounds or so, something like that, right? I mean, 475, 500, something like that. My animals are not emaciated. They're not, and I've already talked about the idea of turning it, it's easier to increase the body conditioning of the animal in terms of like going from like a 6 to a 7 or a 5 to a 6 when the animal has fully developed their frame, right? Usually an animal, their frame is growing exponentially faster until they're about 16 months old. Most animals, all right? And a good way to think about this is like if like a human being is going to grow very quickly until they're about 14 or 15 years old, right? I mean, their frame is going to grow very rapidly. It's the same thing for a cow. It's the same thing for cattle. Their frames will grow very rapidly until they're about 16 months old. And once they reach their maximum frame size, it is actually easier to increase the conditioning of the animal at that point. Up until, until they're about 16 months old, I keep them at a body conditioning score about a 5 or a 6. And if you take a look at all of my animals, none of them are emaciated. I mean, none of them are like massively obese. But I mean, when here in about 8 or 9 months, when their frame size maybe 5 months for the bigger ones, when their frame size is significantly slowing, the growth of their frame size is slowing, it'll be much more realistic to increase the body conditioning score of the animal. And so I find that if I feed the animals, and here's the thing, it's like as long as I roughly understand what I'm doing, as long as I roughly understand and I have the right idea, then I can gauge the feed as I go. If my animals start developing acidosis, then whatever I can reduce, I can reduce the amount of corn they're getting. I can increase the amount of roughage they're getting. Whatever it is that I need to do, I can do it, right? I mean, it doesn't matter as long as I understand what's going on. Right, as long as I understand what's going on, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, as long as what I know is actually correct, all right. As long as as long as I'm doing, the right thing, correctly, etc., then I'm good to go. And so I'm not going to be using a 64 TDN, or I'm not going to be using a 64 NEG feed. I'm going to be using a 0.49. And a 0.49 feed, if I anticipate that the animal is going to eat 30% more, because my whole feeding situation is that I give the animals as much food as they want. That's my whole thing. I don't measure it out. I don't measure out, oh my God, I got to give each animal 2.3% of their body weight a day and mix it in ionophore. And then, if I slightly mess this thing up, then the animals develop acidosis and start having massive diarrhea and bloat. I don't do that stuff. I just give the animals the food. I give the animals the food. I let them eat it. If they start developing acidosis, I'll give them some more hay. I'll reduce the amount of corn they're getting. That's about as precise as I get it. All right, and I do well enough. All right, I do enough to make myself a good amount of money. All right, and so I probably make more money on my 10.5 acres than most people make on 500. So, the thing is, I'm using a 0.49 NEG feed. I'm anticipating that my animals eat about 3 to 3.25% of their body weight a day, and they'll probably end up putting on something about a 3.25, 3 pounds to 3.25 pounds of feed of gain a day. And so, but it doesn't really matter, it's like, oh my God, I was estimating that I was going to make $2,100 a month, and now I'm not actually making $2,100 a month, I'm making $2,500. It doesn't really matter. As long as I have a rough idea, my animals are going to gain properly. This is how much I'm paying for that. This is how much I'm paying for the feed. And then when the grass starts growing in, then I'll be good to go, right? I mean, because think about it like this. My grass right now, I would say that my grass right now is probably about 2 or 3 inches tall, okay? My grass is probably about 2 or 3 inches tall. And, for me to get my grass 2 to 3 inches tall, I used about 1 ton of fertilizer. All right, so so think about it, the entire field grew by about maybe 3 inches. And I used about $500 worth of fertilizer, maybe somewhere around $500 worth of fertilizer. I didn't use one entire ton of urea. Maybe I used actually I think I only used half a ton, but I don't remember exactly. I actually think it was only half a ton. I think I used about $275 worth of fertilizer, and I got like 2 to 3 inches of growth on my grass. $275. And the thing, even right now when feed is cheap, it still costs me $2,100 to order 7 tons of feed. All right, I pay $315 for a tonnage of feed delivered. $315. So I mean, even though feed is cheap, it is still like 5 times more expensive than grass. All right, if I get 1 good month of growing grass, my profits skyrocket. All right, even if my grass just grows decently well, I make about $5,000 a month. If my grass grows exceptionally well, I mean, my profits skyrocket. All right, and that's the thing, is like, the whole thing about grain, even though grain is cheap right now, it is still like 5 times more expensive than the feed. But here's why I'm ordering the feed, because next week it's going to be like 24 degrees. I actually think that my grass is going to die. I'm not going to have any biomass accumulation of grass at all. The grass is not going to grow at all. It'll probably end up even dying. The grass will probably end up dying. And so I won't have any grass at all. And so, if I don't have any grass at all, and when I take a look at my local commodity markets, and I call my broker, and I get an idea of what the feed is going to cost, they tell me this is how much your feed is going to cost, and I run my numbers, right, and then I anticipate this is how much I'm going to, this is This is why I believe I'm gonna make this much. This is why I believe that whatever, you know, I take a look at the overall size of my herd, take the average weight of my herd, take a look at the quality of my animals, take a look at the feeder cattle market, determine how much my animals are worth, and in 1 month when they put on about this much per weight, then they're gonna weigh about this much, and at that weight I believe I'm gonna make this much money. And if I make that much money and they're worth this much money right now, then this is my profit. And if I take that profit and I take half of it and I purchase grain and I feed, you know, etc., etc., when I run the numbers, it actually works out. Then I might as well just buy the feed, because if you really I mean, the feed is free, right? And I don't want my animals walking around with nothing to eat, right? You know, I don't want my animals walking around with nothing to eat. It's 24 degrees outside, the grass isn't growing, the grass is actually dead. And you know, etc., etc., right? And you know, I really want them to gain over 2.5 pounds a day, right? I really want them to gain at least 2.5 pounds a day. And if they're going to gain 2.5 pounds a day, then you know, what are the requirements for that, right? I mean, they're going to need this much energy and this much protein, and what's that going to cost me? How much are they going to eat, etc., etc. All right, but if you took the amount of money that I was gonna, you know, and if you think about, you know, how much money that I use on fertilizing this field and et cetera, whatever, you know, whatever it may be, you know, and then you deducted that off the grain, like, you know, when the weather is good, my grass grows very, very, very well, and et cetera, right? I mean, so, you know, if you took the money that I was gonna put into grain and then you just put it in towards my profits, and then I took a couple $100 out for the feed, I mean, the amount of profit that I make would almost go up by like 250%. All right, you know, and another way to think about it is that 1 tonnage of urea is 50 pounds, is effectively 50 pounds of nitrogen per 100 pounds. So if I have 1 tonnage of urea, that's effectively 1,000 pounds. Urea is effectively 50% nitrogen. It's like 46% nitrogen, but let's just make, you know, okay, we say 46. So that means 1,000 pounds of urea, 2,000 pounds of urea is effectively about 1,000 pounds of nitrogen. Urea is about 50%. Let's just say 50%, and then you can take 10% off of it, because I don't know. You know, let's just make the numbers easy. It's about 1,000 pounds of nitrogen per 1 ton of urea. I'm not gonna put 1 tonnage of urea. I'm not gonna put 1,000 pounds of nitrogen on a 10.5 acre field, right? That's ridiculous. Right, you know, and so, you know, realistically, I mean, we're talking about maybe I put about $200 worth of fertilizer on my field, and I ended up getting about 2 to 3 inches of grass growth. All right, you know, the whole thing, and I've already, you know, and I remember I was talking about my fertilizer calculation, right? I anticipate that my grass, if you think about grass in terms of a overall idea, the idea of growing winter wheat, right? Winter wheat is, you know, if I was going to grow winter wheat, and I was going to anticipate what is the ratio of accumulation of the minerals, right? I was talking about this in terms of you know, because I was talking about like you know, fertilizer for plants is like food for people. If you eat a steak, you're not just eating protein. You're eating protein, fat, vitamins, all at the same time. It's a ratio, right? I mean, you know, if you eat a fruit, right? If you eat an apple, you're not just eating sugar, right? I mean, you're eating sugar, you're eating vitamins, you're eating all of this stuff at the same time. You're accumulating everything at the same time. And it's the same thing with fertilizer. If you put fertilizer on a field, the plant is not just accumulating nitrogen. It is not just accumulating phosphorus. It is not just accumulating potassium. It is accumulating everything at the same time. And so it's actually more reasonable to consider that when you put fertilizer on a field, your plants are accumulating the minerals in ratios. And if I were going to reasonably anticipate with somewhat of an accurate margin, just to put myself in the right idea, just to put myself in the right direction, we're talking about a 5:1:3 or so. It's going to be about a 5:1:3 NPK ratio that the plants are accumulating, right? I've talked about this. I talked about this all the time. You know, the information has not changed one bit. I've legitimately been saying the same thing for like months. All right, you know, 5:1:3. That's reasonably what I anticipate. And if I get better information, I will tell you 5:1:3 is actually better to use a different ratio. All right, and if I use a 5:1:3 fertilizer and I take a look at the commodity markets as a broader anticipation of the entire commodity market, effectively everything more or less follows the price of urea. And so if I take that 513 and instead of doing NPK, I just use nitrogen, and I say, okay, well, instead of 5 units of nitrogen, 1 unit of phosphorus, and 3 units of potassium, I just say 9 units of fertilizer, effectively 9 units of nitrogen, because all of it more or less is going to follow the price of urea. It's very rare to end up in a situation like where a hurricane hit Florida and sulfur prices alone skyrocketed. Almost everything will follow the price of urea. And if you go on the stock market, urea is a global commodity. All right, the price of urea is on the stock market, and right now the price of urea is about $5.50 a ton. So if I anticipate that at just 9, right, I just use 9 as the overall utilization of fertilizer, and then I anticipate that, well, if my grass needs 35 pounds of nitrogen, then it's also going to need, if my grass needs 40 pounds of nitrogen, then it's also going to need 4 pounds of phosphorus, and it's also going to need 30 pounds of potassium, right? So that's what, 34 plus 40, that's 74. So if I need 74 units of fertilizer, and fertilizer is and I've gone through this whole thing, right? I've gone through this whole thing multiple times. I've already talked about this. I talk about this all the time, right? The information has not changed. So if I need whatever, if I need 74 units of fertilizer, and 1 unit of fertilizer is let's just say 200 pounds of urea is one unit of fertilizer, and 200 pounds of urea costs me $50, and that $50 will buy me about 90 something pounds, 94 pounds, 92 pounds of fertilizer, right? And so if I was, and then that's how, et cetera, right? I mean, and so, I didn't really want to spend time talking about fertilizer today again. I wanted to talk about the feed, because I'm changing up my animals' feed. And whenever I find a feed that works, I give you the information, right? I've already talked about the different types of feed that I use. Up in the Northeast, about an hour and a half away, they grow a lot of soybeans. And when the soybeans are in season, it's very cheap for me to buy soybeans. I can buy soybeans for like $40 a 1,000 pound roll. It's like a 1,200 pound roll, and I can buy that for like $40, $50. Soybean and corn is something that I had a lot of success with. If I feed them soybean and I feed them corn, I make a lot of money on that. When the grass is in an early stage of development, I'll feed them hay and distiller grains, depending on what kind of a quality of hay I can get. If we're talking about soybean hay, then that's going to be different. Depending on the quality of the grass, depending on my overall situation, the feed that I give my animals change. And the feed that I'm giving my animals right now is a grain pellet. I'm going to give them a total diet grain pellet. I'm going to give them a grain pellet that is effectively their entire diet. And so and whenever I find a good diet, whenever I find a good ration, I give you the information, right? I give the information away for free. I'm not selling you anything. If anything, your money's not going to do anything for me. Trust me. I probably make more money than you and everybody combined. All right. So, I just do this because I'm giving the information away for free. All right. Why not? Right. And I said, why not? Right. I mean, why not? Right. I mean, and so, the soybean, the whole thing about soybean, sometimes I feed soybean corn. If my grass is in a very early stage of development and it's been heavily fertilized, I'll feed them like a hay, and depending on the quality of the hay, I'll give them a different amount of corn or distiller grains with that hay. If the grass is in a middle stage of development, I'll give them some corn, and maybe I'll give them a little bit of distiller grains. If the grass is starting to go into late stage of growth, if the feed values of the grass are substantially lower, then I'll feed them more corn and distiller grains. If I feed hay, I'll mix that hay with the distiller grains and corn. And when I feed them a grain pellet, I got a grain pellet right now that I'm getting. It's a 16% protein. I thought it was a lot of protein, but they said it's fine for the smaller calves. It's real good for the smaller calves. And then they gave me a 0.49 NEG. So when I asked the feed mill, what is the NEG concentration of the or the feed mill. They just told me the NEG concentration of the grain pellet. And I've been watching presentations on different animal feeds with the intentions of getting information on TDN and protein, and the amount of their body weight that's being fed. That's the information that I was looking for. And while I was watching these presentations, they were also giving out NEG and NEM estimates. And I remember thinking, I wonder what is this NEG NEM thing. I wonder what that is. And this morning I was talking to my feed mill, and they were giving me the NEG. I was asking them for the TDN, and I was asking them for the protein concentration, and they gave me the protein concentration, and then they gave me the NEG concentration. And so I was like, oh, and then I looked up, and I was like, I've been wondering what this NEG thing is. I want to know what this NEG thing is. And so I went and I looked it up, and NEG is just the net energy required for gain. And the net energy required for gain is only achievable after the animal has obtained their energy, the energy required for maintenance. And so and so these are the numbers. And so I went and I read more into it. I read more papers. I was reading more information, and I found this paper that was they're feeding 700-pound steers a 6.4 NEG 0.64 NEG diet. These animals are gaining 3.62 pounds a day, and they're being fed 2.3% of their body weight a day. And I thought that was interesting because for my